Wonderful day. Wonderful day. Wonderful day. This is your neighborhood Sensei Fouché, telling all y'all stay woke. But relax. Relax. Take notes. I've been dealing with the power of now, in specific breakdown and reference as of late. And I wound up getting a lot of other titles today. One is I've been speaking about Adlerian psychology. So I actually wound up purchasing the physical copy on Alfred Adler's Understanding Human Nature. I have a lot of different books that reference a lot of his Alfred Adler's theologies on psychology, and I have to add to the collection so that way I could get different specifics in regards to the information that I'm sharing with all of you who choose to follow and absorb the information that I'm paying forward. There's a lot of things in today's day, of course, and we've been talking about discovering your moral true self and dismissing or submerging the conscious con, the character, the clown. So when you're dealing with worldly issues, it's very distracting to keep focus into keeping your navigational compass of your true self. And that's what I want to try to cover for a moment. In this world we live, as far as the physical world, in living, which is different than being, on the level or the plane of living, we are in a constriction of being governed. And governments are created to keep order and control of societies and civilization. If there is no order, then we have anarchy. And when we have anarchy, there's chaos and there's just unorganized madness beyond what we already have disguised in different covers of madness. So what I wanted to do with this topic and this specific show is break down governments. So our topic is governments. What are they? And how are they defined? One of my top books, as far as on my elite tier of overall favorites, this book explained so much simple breakdown about this government. So I laugh when I first heard the reference in Trump's initial campaign going into the 2016 election, of Make America Great Again. Because everything that we've been covering in past and future and focusing on now, America was never great. There was always someone or some form of oppression to where not everyone was happy. And to this day, people still aren't happy with conditions of today and talking about the good old days. So if we talk about, America was great, then we're talking about, for me, there was a lot of racism and segregation. You know what I'm saying? So, when blacks didn't have equal rights, or African Americans, to use the politically correct reference, when African Americans were under the segregation laws, or even more than that, enslaved, was that when America was great? When they were able to exploit and use people? How about when women were subject to stay home and take care of kids or have families? Now, they'll sugarcoat and tell you, well, that's the way it was in the old days. And yeah, that's kind of the way it was, but there was a lot of loose behavior and a lot of women with unruly children, no different than today. You know what I'm saying? It was just more of or less of an industrialized or technological time as we have now. You know what I'm saying? But the mind state was the same. You know what I'm saying? So if we talk about governments, or, like I was saying back in reference, like, when was this country ever great? But when we look at the history of a lot of different governments, the reason why those governments never fully succeeded in having current sustainability to this day, as far as still having that government, Roman Empire, the British Empire, whatever, because these governments start to a level or degree of rising from an oppression, but then those people that rise from the oppression eventually become the oppressors. And then you wind up having folks that are oppressed by these oppressors who used to be oppressed, and now they want freedom. So now they're going to fight for their freedom and overthrow that government, form a new government, and start to rise from a state of having value and wanting more value and sustainable power. And keeping that sustainable power, you wind up having division and oppression. It's just a cycle of a never-ending hamster wheel. And we're just referencing government. And every government, including this one, is not going to be forever. This government, especially with this current president, the way that he's talking, we're already moving towards a direction of what these conspiracy theorists, like they stated this guy to be, Ralph Epperson, or there was another guy that we used to study. I can't remember his name right now, but yeah, he was considered a big hold up, let me look this cat up, because it's pretty important to put a name. But yeah, there we go. who it is. I thought it was somebody else, but I see Milton William Cooper. Behold a Pale Horse. Yeah, he was a conspiracy theorist back in the 80s, and I guess his book dropped in the early 90s. But yeah, he was talking about pretty much the same thing as far as like this new order or this new government that's trying to create a world government, and that would be the end of what we would call civilization, and we would go into this technological age of control of society. And we're kind of going through that right now. You know what I'm saying? When I use those kind of terms like technological, and they were talking about cyber warfare or technological warfare is where we're at now. Like, those are the terms they're using today that they said these conspiracy theorists were crazy into making any kind of statements with, going back, now I'm talking like 40 years ago, 50 if that, somewhere in the 70s. Like, if I'm right, that's where some of these theories started to begin, because remember, the whole computer thing started to really pop probably in the mid-late 70s, and then we started to have the computer boom with Apple in the early 80s, so on and so forth. But again, governments. So this book is called The Unseen Hand, an introduction to the conspiratorial view of history by Ralph Epperson. This book, blew me away. I've probably read this book maybe about 12 times in 28 years. You know what I'm saying? It's just a strong reference book that I use to continue to keep me in line with American history and understanding specific terms that I just wasn't extremely interested in my earlier days of high school and college, going to school for business. But let's begin. Forms of government. You have rule by God, a theocracy, rule by man, which has various forms. There's different versions of man-ruled government, as opposed to a theocracy, which is ruled by God. I mean, if they say God rules over, the dominion of the earth, then basically there are sub-governments underneath the main govern of this, phantom or mystery God. So you have sub-governments underneath the govern of God being the controller of man. So the different forms of government, and they're labeling 4. And from this 4, you'll follow as we go along. Rule by no one. If no one is in charge, that's anarchy, right? That's what it says, anarchy. We know that, or we should, or if we don't, we know now. You're not a dummy. Trust me. You know what I'm saying? It's about knowing, not the fact that you never knew, because if you never knew, now you know. If you knew before and you just disregarded it, then this is just a refresher. We're not calling you, it's okay to be the dummy. If you didn't know, this is what we're here for. Rule by no one is anarchy. Again, rule by one man, a dictatorship or a monarchy. Monarchies was when you had kings and queens, right? That's the old days. Ruled by a few men is called an oligarchy. Ruled by the majority is labeled a democracy. All right? Fair enough, right? Following? So we have an anarchy ruled by no one, a dictatorship or a monarchy. Remember Hitler? Remember Castro? Remember Gaddafi? You know, El Amin. Yeah, and if we go into the old days of kings from, King James or King Louis the 14th, King Louis the 16th, whatever, that's the monarchy or the dictatorship ruled by one man. Ruled by a few men is an oligarchy again. An oligarchy is ruled by a few men, and a democracy is ruled by the majority. I mean, we're supposed to be in what we call a democracy, and that's supposed to be a government of the people, right? Which is the majority. Anarchy is a form of government in transition between two other forms of government. Anarchy is created by those who wish to destroy one form of government so that it can be replaced with the form of government the anarchists wish. It too will be discarded as a viable alternative. It is generally conceded that even a monarchy or a dictatorship is an oligarchy. Now, keep in word with that word oligarchy. Oligarchy is going to be a very key thing. And the reason why I say that, I was listening to CNN this morning, and they were mentioning the heads of a lot of the technology, right? When it comes to your platforms of Facebook or TikTok or whatever, because what they're stating is that there's going to be a new group of elite that takes over from the old elite, which is basically old money. Old money is when you deal with the Rockefellers, the Rodham family, which is where Hillary's Clinton's maiden name is Rodham, the Rodham family. Like I said, the Rockefellers, so on and so forth when it comes to these, J.P. Morgan, you know what I'm saying? All of these industrialists from the end of the 19th century going into the 20th century is the old money, and now they want to bring in the new money. You know what I'm saying? So the oligarchy is a key word that we need to focus on. All right, so again, it is generally conceded that even a monarchy or a dictatorship is an oligarchy or a government run by a small ruling minority. Every monarchy has its small circle of advisors, right? When you remember the king, in the times of the king and the queen, they had a trusted advisory group that assisted or was suggestive to the king or queen in power as far as implementing or changing laws. Every monarchy has its small circle of advisors who allow the king or dictator to rule as long as he does so in a manner pleasing to the oligarchy. Again, who allow the king or dictator to rule as long as he does so in a manner pleasing to the oligarchy. A lot of kings and queens have been overthrown by these advisors, these people of high position within that society that have money. The people that have the money are the ones behind the scenes that control the strings. So as long as, the person in power, whether it's a dictator or a king or queen, continues to be in agreement with how the small group of advisors agree to flow, then they'll continue to let them do what they do. Now, when it starts to compromise the livelihood of that group of advisors, that's when you wind up having betrayal, and that's how these kings or whoever, queens or whatever, they get killed. Let's go on. It is doubtful that there has ever been a true dictatorship of rule by one person again, anywhere in the world, except in some isolated instances such as in a tribe or in a clan. With a democracy, for this form of government is traditionally controlled at the top by a small ruling oligarchy. Again, they said a democracy has a small ruling oligarchy. The people in a democracy are conditioned to believe that they are indeed the decision-making power in the government, but in truth, there is almost always a small circle at the top making the decisions for the entirety. So the only true form of government throughout history has been the oligarchy, a rule by a small minority. Now really think about that. Really think about that, because everybody's saying, oh, well, the president runs everything. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He has to answer to a group of people, and if he doesn't fall in line, then he will not be around. And our history has proven that, even though it hasn't been specifically documented, but there has been very questionable circumstances attached to a lot of these assassinations of prior presidents. So, a government of the masses, authority derived through mass meeting or any form of direct expression, results in mobocracy, attitude toward property is communistic, negating property rights. A government of masses, a government of the masses, authority derived through mass meeting or any form of direct expression, results in mobocracy, attitude toward property is communistic, negating property rights. So it basically says or states that if the masses run the government or are the government, there will be a lot of mob-related instances. Think about in this history of this country with the Old West. Before the West became civilized, you had a lot of mob mentality. You know what I'm saying? That's how you had all those, so-called gunfights that we now, remember in nostalgia as, some fantastic form of action. You know what I'm saying? These were people's real lives, you know what I'm saying, in this mob related society in the early West. Attitude toward law is that the will of the majority shall regulate, whether it be based upon deliberation or governed by passion, prejudice, and impulse without restraint or regard to consequence. Again, that adds on to the mob mentality. The mob is about, they have an attitude towards the law. They don't respect any law. Whatever they want to abide by for the moment of what satisfies them, that's their will and that's their decree. You know what I'm saying? It results in demagogism or demagogism, which is this demonization, bad doing or constructing bad behavior, agitation, discontent, and anarchy. A democracy, according to this definition, is actually controlled by a demagogue, defined as a speaker who seeks to make capital or social discontent and gain political influence. So a demagogue is basically like an instigator, you know, somebody that goes in front of the crowd and instigates a situation in order to create a reaction. So again, a democracy, according to this definition, is actually controlled by a demagogue, defined as a speaker who seeks to make capital of social discontent and gain political influence. So demagogues are usually hired by those supporting an oligarchy as a form of government to create the anarchy or social discontent that the oligarchs convert into a true oligarchy. Democracies are converted to anarchy, where no one rules, as the oligarchs seek to control the government themselves. And anarchy ends with a dictatorship or a tyrannical form of government when the oligarchy imposes total control over all the people. Let's keep going. Because the United States is a democracy, the majority of the people decide how our government will be organized and run, and that includes the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The people do this by electing representatives, and these men and women then carry out the wishes of the people, right? Senators, governors, mayors, House of Representatives, judges. So if democracies are in truth oligarchies, and pardon me for a sip of water, so if democracies are in truth oligarchies, where the minority rules, is there a form of government that protects both the minority and majority's rights? There is, and it's called a republic. Again, so if democracies are in truth oligarchies, where the minority rules, is there a form of government that protects both minority and majority rights? There is, and it's called a republic, which is defined as, in the republican form of government, the power rests in a written constitution wherein the powers of the government are limited
so that the people retain the maximum amount of power themselves. In addition to limiting the power of the government, care is also taken to limit the power of the people, to restrict the rights of both the majority and the minority. Perhaps the simplest method of illustrating the difference between an oligarchy, a democracy, and a republic would be to discuss the basic plot of the classic grade B Western movie. Now, check this analogy out. For anyone that doesn't understand how this government flows and how the people fall in line with this government, this democratic republic, check how this hamster wheel rolls. In this plot, one that the moviegoer has probably seen 100 times, the brutal villain rides into town and guns down the unobtrusive town merchant by provoking him into a gunfight. That's any classic Western, right? The sheriff hears the gunshot and enters the scene. He asks the assembled crowd what had happened, and they relate the story. The sheriff then takes the villain into custody and removes him to city jail. Back at the scene of the shooting, usually in a tavern, an individual stands up on a table, the instigator. They call him the demagogue, and exhorts the crowd to take the law into its own hands and lynch the villain. Right? This is a mob mentality that's starting to brew. The group decides that this is the course of action that they should take. And I'm bringing Donald Trump's name into this conversation, listening to his inauguration speech. The group decides that this is the course of action that they should take, where they're going to lynch the culprit. Notice that the group now becomes a democracy where the majority rules, because now the mob is the democracy, because they're the majority. They're all in agreement that they want to hang the perpetrator. And down the street they, now called a mob, go. The democracy is the mob. They reach the jail and demand that the villain be released to their custody. The mob has spoken by majority vote. The villain must hang. The sheriff appears before the democracy and explains that the villain has the right to a trial by jury, right? That's what we do in our American system, you know what I'm saying, with courts. You know, you're innocent until proven guilty. The demagogue counters by explaining that the majority has spoken. The villain must hang. The sheriff explains that his function is to protect the rights of the individual, be he innocent or guilty, until that individual has the opportunity to defend himself in a court of law. The sheriff continues by explaining that the will of the majority cannot deny this individual that right. The demagogue continues to exhort the democracy to lynch the villain, the mob. The democracy is the mob. But it is the sheriff. But if the sheriff is persuasive and convinces the democracy that he exists to protect their rights as well, but basically saying, if you was in the same boat as somebody that you knew, then we'd want to protect their rights too. So we can't do this to him, because if this happens to you, we can't do this to you neither. The demagogue, again, continues to exhort the democracy to lynch the villain, but if the sheriff is persuasive and convinces the democracy that he exists to protect their rights as well, the scene should end as the people leave, convinced of the merits of the arguments of the sheriff. The Republican form of government has triumphed over the democratic form of mob action. In summary, the sheriff represents the republic, the demagogue, the control of the democracy, and the mob is the democracy. So basically, the demagogue would be the instigator or could be the dictator. And the mob is the democracy or the majority. The republic recognizes that the man has certain inalienable rights and the government is created to protect those rights even from the acts of a majority. Notice that the republic must be persuasive in front of the democracy and that the republic will only continue to exist as long as the people recognize the importance and validity of the concept. Should the people wish to overthrow the republic and the sheriff, they certainly have the power but not the right to do so, because the Constitution states that they can't. But if they really, really go into a very destructive mind state, then yeah, they'll do it, and then that'll be anarchy. The republic, in the form of the Roman government, washed its hands of the matter after finding the accused Jesus innocent of all charges and turned him over to the democracy, which was the mob, and they crucified him. Very interesting stuff, right? In a democracy, then, might makes right. Whoever is in the majority, being that they're all in cahoots of the same idea, then it's not about what's right, it's who's right. In a republic, right makes might. What is right is the power, not who's right. In a democracy, the law restricts the people. In a republic, the law restricts the government. When Moses of the Bible carried the Ten Commandments down to the people, they were written on stone. The majority of the people did not vote to accept them, right? Everybody knows that story, so makes sense, right? They were offered as the truth and were in stone to teach the people that they couldn't change them by majority vote. Basically, it was a republic. You know what I'm saying? And the people were the democracy or the majority. But Moses said that the word of God was the laws of the republic. But the people rejected the commandments anyway, just as they can reject the principles of the Republican form of government should they choose to do so. And that's what Trump is trying to do, in my opinion. I'm not stating it fact. That's just an opinion. The American founding fathers, while not writing the laws in stone, did attempt to restrict man's ability to tamper with them. The rules for reversing or amending the Constitution are rigidly set out in the provisions of the Constitution itself. And I'm going to end right there. So, if you need to go back into
this specific video, please go back. We covered the oligarchy, which is the advisors or the circle of power or strongest of financial success in society. They are the oligarchy, and they are the ones that allow for a king or for a dictator, or even more, a democracy, to stay in an existed control. The democracy is the mad mob, and the mad mob needs containment, and that's what the republic is for. The republic is a constitution of laws created by government and will of the people to keep an order of control over the masses. But in the construct of having a demagogue, which is an instigator, and an instigator usually has the best interest for a smaller, secret, controlling group, and they manipulate a large mass of people, which is the democracy, into creating a form of rebellion or anarchy. Because through anarchy, then they'll overthrow whatever existing government is in place, and then the oligarchy and the demagogue will swoop in and create and structure a new way to follow, being that them as the instigator had created a situation that the mob followed. So the mob basically believes in the demagogue. And if the demagogue says do this, then this is what they're going to do, because they already did it. You know what I'm saying? So again, the oligarchy, the small group of people, creates an instigator, or they have someone react as an instigator in order to create an uproar of a large amount of people to overthrow a system in place, to create a devastation of that system, to implement a new system of their choice, which the people or the mob will agree to, being that they follow the direction of the demagogue who got his orders from the oligarchy, or the small group of secret people that have a greater aspiration of political aspiration using their financial influence. And the republic is, again, a government or a set of rules that are followed by a group of people that are voted by the majority to keep these instilled principles in line for the whole, so that way they don't create a system of regression, and then that's going to institute what they would call a civil unrest. And then with that civil unrest, we will have what they would call a civil war, which has already happened in this country already, as we know. So there you go. Government. If you need to go back and cover some parts of what this whole government thing represents and really think about it as far as not only past history, but also current today. And I'm going to tell all of you really enlightened folks, we already know we ain't got to worry. And those that are trying to follow to the path of enlightenment and really find the depth of that courage that you need to embrace, you ain't got to worry about it neither. You know what I'm saying? Don't be scared. All you have to do is live in your highest state of being. And in that highest state of being, you will acknowledge how to eliminate the distractions and master managing through the manipulation. This is just neighborhood sensei Fouché telling all y'all stay woke and relax, and take notes. And remember, you have control over you. The government has control over you if you allow them beyond your inner state of being. And even though you live within a system of control, you are able to manage your manipulation, manage your movements through that manipulation, and will not be controlled. So on that note, I'ma just tell you, stay smooth and one.